So in this video, we're going to talk about what is a polynomial. So this is kind of like an introduction to polynomials. Okay, and so a polynomial is a sum of a bunch of terms, and the terms are all made up of or I should say possibly. They don't have to have this, but they possibly have this. Made up of, I should say, numbers, letters raised to powers, numbers, actually maybe I should say or. Trying to find the right way. It's a weird, I'm going to show examples, so hopefully it'll make more sense. Numbers or letters raised to powers or combinations of those things. Okay, so let me show some examples. So here's an example. 10x to the fifth plus 5x. So you'll notice here that we have a number 10 times x to the fifth power plus another number 5 times x. We could have something like 7z plus 13z squared minus 5. So here, again, number times z, 13 times z to a power, minus 15. And notice here on the minus 15, right, there's no variable. And that's okay. So there's no letter with that, and that's okay. Here's another example. X squared minus 5x plus 3. Even something as simple as, say, 6x squared. Even something as simple as 4. Or, say, 4x. All of these are examples of polynomials. Okay, the polynomial, like these last couple I had here, a polynomial usually has more than one term, but these three examples here, they only have one term, and that's okay. One of the things we care about with polynomials, and we'll kind of make a chart here so you can see them as we go along, and that is what we call the leading term. So I'm going to make my lines kind of here so I can fill stuff in. Okay, so here's some polynomials. So I'm going to write the definition down here at the bottom for leading term. So leading term. And the word leading is a little bit misleading, actually, because generally when you think leading term, you think the first term. And so we don't actually mean the first term. What we mean is the term with the highest power. So the term with the highest power. And then the other piece of this, there's two other pieces, and there's the degree of the polynomial. And so that is the highest power. And then there's also the what the leading coefficient is. So the leading coefficient is the number in the leading term. And by number, I really mean the coefficient. But I'm going to show you some examples here. Okay, so let's, in this problem here, so I've got polynomials. Let's, for each of these polynomials, write down what the leading term is. And then let's write down the degree. and the leading coefficient. Okay, so in this first problem here, right, I have 10x to the fifth. So the 10x to the fifth, that is, x to the fifth is the highest power, right? This is x to the fifth. This here, when you just have an x all by itself, you can think of it as x to the first. So the highest power here is that 5. So the leading term here is the 10x to the fifth. The degree is 5. And the leading coefficient is this number here in front of the x to the fifth. And so the number in front of the x to the fifth is a 10. On the second polynomial, the leading term, again, in this case, it's not the first one, right? The first one is 7z, but here I have 13z squared. And that, too, is the highest power. So it's 13z squared. The degree is 2, and the leading coefficient is a 13. In my next one, the piece here with the highest power is this x squared piece. So x squared, the degree is 2, and the leading coefficient, remember, when there's not a number in front of something, you can think of it as a 1. So I can think of it like there's a 1 in front of that x squared. So my leading coefficient is a 1. Now, my next problem, there's only one term, right? So when I have a problem that only has one term, it by default is the leading term. So this is 6x squared. The degree is 2, and the coefficient is a 6. And I'm going to jump down here to the 4x first. So, and then we'll come back and we'll do the 4. So in the 4x, again, there's only one term, so it is the leading term, 4x. The degree, so again, remember, this is to the x to the first power, so the degree would be 1, and the leading coefficient is a 4. And then this one kind of weird one here, right, the 4, it's a little weird because, so it is just the leading term again, but there's no x's, right? And so when there's not an x, you can think of it as really I have x to the 0 power, right? We did that video before that I talked about how anything to the 0 power is really just 1. So this is really the same as having 4 times 1, and 4 times 1 is just 4. So you can think of it as x to the 0. So the degree would be 0, and the leading coefficient here would also be a 4. So that's kind of the basics of polynomials. And then over the next couple of videos, I'm going to talk about how you add and subtract polynomials, how you multiply polynomials, and how you divide polynomials.